Back to the daily grind. The channel's getting false flagged by triggered trolls, so make sure you subscribe to the new channel. Let's get to the MMA news. Tony Ferguson versus the world on deck. Let's get straight to it. If you've never watched the Versus the World, this is how I do it. I'm a poet and I didn't even know it. I'm going to get into Tony Ferguson's history and also how I think he would do versus 1 through 15 in the UFC lightweight division. So let's get straight to it. Tony Ferguson is scheduled to fight Kevin Lee at UFC 216 for the interim lightweight title. Winner gets Conor McGregor for the lightweight championship. So this is more than just an interim title fight. This is a huge fight. This is a lottery fight. This is like the winner hits the lottery, because you fight Conor McGregor and win or lose, it's going to be a bigger payday than you've ever got in your career if you have the right contract. Now, Kevin Lee, who's younger, I don't know if his contract, if he fights Conor McGregor, he might not get pay-per-view points because he's a younger guy. Tony Ferguson, I believe, would be on about a 11 fight win streak, so he would probably be able to, get some points. But either way, man, the winner fights Conor McGregor, and that's hitting the lottery. So Tony Ferguson was supposed to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 209 for this interim lightweight title, but Khabib Nurmagomedov missed weight, and after that, Tony Ferguson was forced to wait for Khabib Nurmagomedov to get healthy, and then after that, Khabib Nurmagomedov was still unable to fight at UFC 216 when the UFC needed a main event, so they gave Kevin Lee the title shot. Kevin Lee is ranked number 7, and Tony Ferguson is ranked number 2. A lot of people believe Tony Ferguson should be ranked number 1 due to Khabib's inactivity. Tony Ferguson's on a 9 or 10 fight winning streak, and he fights often whenever he's not waiting for his title shot. With that being said, I pretty much told you his history pretty much as far as what matters right now, and that's his winning streak, and it's impressive, man. He's coming off of a win over Rafael dos Anjos, who was the former lightweight champion. So I mean, that's impressive in itself. He showed he can beat a championship caliber fighter, and that was his most recent win on a 9 fight winning streak. His win before that was against Lando Venata. Some people give him slack for that win because Lando Venata was unknown, unranked, and Lando Venata dropped him in that fight. It was actually really, really scary for Tony Ferguson's streak because Lando Venata had him on skates. It was crazy. It was like, holy shit, is this newcomer gonna come in here and upset Tony Ferguson? But then Tony Ferguson was able to recover. Lando Venata, he expended all of his gas trying to finish Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson took over, and with that fucking will of the champion, man, I think he might be the champion real soon as far as versus Kevin Lee. I think I'm gonna go with Tony Ferguson winning that fight for sure. But anyways, that's not what we're talking about right now. So he fought Lando Venata, and the people who give him slack and say, oh, he was an unknown guy, the thing is, he was scheduled to fight Michael Chiesa. Michael Chiesa was forced to pull out. Lando Venata stepped up, and Tony Ferguson showed right there. I'll fight somebody on short notice because Lando Venata was on short notice. It was only 2 weeks notice. Even though Tony Ferguson had went through a training camp, it wasn't preparing for Lando Venata. He had no clue how Lando Venata was going to come out there, and he got clipped up for taking that fight on 2 weeks notice against an unknown opponent, but he was able to still get the win. So he gets credit for me for that Lando Venata victory, and Lando Venata actually has came out since then and been pretty impressive. So it wasn't like Lando Venata was actually just a random scrub. So he's on a 9 fight winning streak currently. Lando Venata, his last loss was to Michael Johnson, which was 10 fights ago. The UFC offered him Michael Johnson when Khabib pulled out of UFC 209, but they weren't going to offer him the title fight. And he was like, I'm not going to go in here just for a revenge match against when he feels like he should be fighting for the title. And I'm kind of curious why they offered him the title versus Khabib and not Michael Johnson at that point, but that's what they did. So I mean, he didn't take the fight, and some people say, oh, he turned down the fight versus Michael Johnson, and it's like it's got to do with the title. He showed he would fight somebody on short notice whenever he fought Lando Venata on short notice, put his streak on the line. So I mean, I don't give him slack for not taking that Michael Johnson fight. He's taking the Kevin Lee fight just because they're putting the title on the line. It's not about who it is. Before Lando Venata, he fought Edson Barboza. He beat Edson Barboza with the same bare-bow choke he finished Lando Venata with. He's beat Josh Thompson, who's the only guy to finish Nate Diaz. I got that mistaken in my Kevin Lee vs. the World video. I was thinking of Conor McGregor's 3 submission losses. But yeah, so he beat Josh Thompson four fights ago in his win streak. Then Gleison Tibau, a guy that some people believe beat Khabib. Actually, Khabib's undefeated, but if you go back and watch his fight versus Gleison Tibau, Tony Ferguson believes Gleison Tibau won the fight. He said that in the UFC 209 build-up in Khabib's face. He said, Gleison Tibau beat you, motherfucker. It was funny. Khabib's face was like, what? What did he just say? No, he didn't. No, he didn't, mother. I went back and watched the fight just because Tony Ferguson said that. And, man, you can give it to Khabib. I've seen worse decisions, but at the same time, if they would have gave it to Gleison Tibau, I wouldn't have been too surprised either. It was a good fight, though. If you haven't watched it, I suggest you watch it. I mean, it's a good fight. And Tony Ferguson submitted Gleison Tibau. Before that, Abel Trujillo. Before that, Danny Castillo. I mean, he's on a winning streak, and it's against guys that, you know, have a reputation in the UFC. It's not against a bunch of scrubs, you know. Some people, they look at Khabib's record, they look at Kevin Lee's record, and they say, who are the guys that you've beat that we know? You know, Tony Ferguson has Rafael Dos Anjos, Edson Barboza, Josh Thompson, Gleison Tibau, Danny Castillo, Lando Venata, Kevin Lee. He's got Michael Chiesa, and he's got, other than that, you know, the top contenders haven't been fighting, so he hasn't been able to fight these guys. He's called them out, but the only one off the top of my head for Kevin Lee is Michael Chiesa, and then before that, what was it? Mustafaev. It was one of Khabib's teammates, actually. So, I mean, yeah, Kevin Lee, he's a, you know, even though if you do the knowledge and watch the fights, and you see, like the Mustafaev guy he beat, he only had 2 losses. He was 2-0 in the UFC, and so the people were fighting aren't actually scrubs. I mean, you have to give anyone credit in the UFC that built their resume in the UFC, because the UFC is where the, you know, overall best fighters. As far as strength of division, the UFC has the strongest divisions. That's one thing you must give them. They are as far as overall talent, they are the A-League. Now, as far as being able to put on a card and fighter treatment and stuff like that and sponsorship deals, it's close there. But as far as overall talent, they are the A-League. So for Kevin Lee to have his entire career in the UFC, kind of like Tony Ferguson, you know, grow his last 12 fights straight in the last 3 years, winning streaks. You know, Kevin Lee's 9-1 in his last 10 fights. Tony Ferguson is 9-0 in his last 9 fights. Oh, and Michael Johnson was lost. So they're both 9-1, and Kevin Lee and Michael Johnson are 9-1 in their last 10 fights. So, and it's in the UFC, tough level competition, whether you know the names or not. Now, Tony Ferguson's is more impressive, but, you know, and that's why I think I'm giving Tony Ferguson the edge versus Kevin Lee. So we'll get to that during those predictions. That's not here, not now. So that's the history on on Tony Ferguson. And so him versus Kevin Lee is going to be a really good fight. With that being said, this is going to be a lot quicker. How I think Tony Ferguson would do versus the top 15 in the UFC lightweight division. Conor McGregor, I believe, you know, Lando Venata was able to drop. The same thing with Kevin Lee. I see people, if I see you get dropped by a shot, then I believe Conor McGregor can sleep you, can lay you down. I mean, that's Conor McGregor. That's why he's the fucking champ right now. If you see, he's gonna get to that opening and he's gonna take you down. And if you're a guy that's known for taking shots, if you get clipped up occasionally, Conor McGregor, I'm gonna pick him to lay you down, because he's did it to so many people now. I mean, high level people now. I mean, Jose Aldo, Chad Mendez, Eddie Alvarez, Nate Diaz, dropped him. You know, just dropping guys. So if you're a guy that I've seen dropped before, I believe Conor can drop you. And that's the case with Tony Ferguson. I've seen him dropped before. I think Conor McGregor can drop him. Do I think Tony Ferguson can win? Fuck yeah. He's got a really good chance. Conor McGregor would be the favorite, but it would be almost a pick'em. Tony Ferguson's fucking skilled. He's one of the best. He definitely deserves. He could be the champion right now, for sure. So, I mean, he could already be the interim champion if Khabib wasn't forced to pull out of the fight. So Tony Ferguson definitely has a shot, a good chance of winning. It could be 50-50. It could be 51-49. But I'm just saying I would lean 51 Conor, 49 Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson versus Khabib. I got Tony Ferguson just because Khabib's had 2 opportunities to fight Tony Ferguson now, and he's hasn't been able to do it. Didn't answer the call. Wasn't able to answer the call. So I gotta go with Tony Ferguson. I gotta lean toward Tony Ferguson, the guy that's active, the guy that's willing to fight anytime, anywhere, any place. Eddie Alvarez versus Tony Ferguson. I got Tony Ferguson, dog. Tony Ferguson's fucking in his prime right now. Eddie Alvarez is heading out of his. I got Tony Ferguson, the fucking on a 9-fight winning streak. Yep, got Tony Ferguson. Edson Barboza. Tony Ferguson's beat Edson Barboza. I'd have him again in the rematch. Justin Gaethje, I got Tony Ferguson. It would be a good fight. Justin Gaethje's got that chance of knocking Tony Ferguson out, though, just like Conor, just like Lando Venata almost did. That would be a really good fight. It would be a close one, maybe 60-40 Tony Ferguson, but I would take Tony. Nate Diaz, that would be a good fight, man, but I would lean toward Tony, like 55-45, like maybe 60-40 is there. You know, probably 60-40 Tony Ferguson would be the favorite, but I would love the fight. Nate Diaz definitely isn't just going to get rolled over or dominated by any stretch of the means. He's got a fucking real good chance in the fight, but I would go 60-40 Tony Ferguson. Dustin Poirier, I got Tony Ferguson. I said Ferguson. Dustin Poirier, I got Tony Ferguson winning that fight. Dustin Poirier is a good fighter, but, you know, he's ranked 8 right now. He got clipped up by Michael Johnson. So, I mean, you know, Tony Ferguson lost to Michael Johnson too, but it was a lot longer ago, and since then Tony Ferguson's did nothing but win. Dustin Poirier was in the Eddie Alvarez fight recently, which was called a no contest. So, I mean, you know, he's just not even really in the contention spot right now. He's got like a MMA puncher's chance for sure, but I would lean toward Tony Ferguson as the favorite. Michael Johnson, I got Tony Ferguson in the rematch. You know, it was a long time ago since they fought. Michael Johnson was the last person to beat Tony Ferguson, but Michael Johnson has been falling down the rankings. Tony Ferguson has did nothing but shoot up the rankings since then. Michael Johnson's coming off of a fucking head-banging knockout loss to Justin Gaethje, which I watched again recently. He was taking some huge shots. And let him get up. Ooh, that was a good fight. Michael Chiesa versus Tony Ferguson. I got Tony Ferguson. Michael Chiesa did just lose to Kevin Lee. They were scheduled to fight Tony Ferguson and Michael Chiesa before. Michael Chiesa was forced to pull out due to injury. I would have Tony Ferguson winning that fight. Ally Quinta. It would be a good, fun fight. You know, some drama behind it, but I would pick Tony Ferguson. Ally Quinta's just not active enough, even though he's a young stud, man. It sucks that he's selling real estate and shit right now and not wanting to fight. So I got Tony Ferguson. Beneil Dariush, Anthony Pettis, and Evan Dunham, Gilbert Melendez. I got Tony Ferguson versus all these guys. So the moral of the story, I got Tony Ferguson versus everybody but Conor. Kevin Lee is probably the closest. Him and Justin Gaethje got the closest chance of beating Tony Ferguson in my mind, and Khabib. But Khabib, who knows when we're going to see him fight again. His manager said he only wants Conor or the title. So, and by the way, fuck Tony Ferguson. Khabib's manager with the fucking W. Alright, so it is what it is. Let the hitters know what the fuck you think about Tony Ferguson versus the world in the comments, I guess. I was going to say versus Kevin Lee, but that's not what this video is. Fuck it. It is what it is. I'm out.